My name is Harold Whitman, and at 72 years old, I still keep my mornings the way I always have. Coffee strong, newspaper folded, ledger balanced. I may walk slower than I once did, but my mind hasn't dulled. In fact, numbers remain sharper to me than most people's intentions. Numbers don't lie. People do. It was a Sunday after church when I first realized how far my own family's intentions had shifted. My son Eric and his wife Clara had stopped by for lunch. I'd cooked a simple roast with potatoes, something Diane, my late wife, had taught me to perfect long before she passed. I was clearing the dishes when I paused in the hallway and overheard them talking in the kitchen. Clara's voice was low but cutting, sharp in a way she probably thought I couldn't hear. "He's too old to handle money anymore, Eric. Did you see him mark the calendar wrong last week? What if he forgets bills, or worse, signs something he shouldn't?" Eric mumbled something, soft, hesitant, but Clara pressed on. "If we don't step in, we'll be left cleaning up a mess. We need control of his accounts now, before it's too late." The words stopped me cold. For a moment I just stood there with a dish towel in my hands, heart thudding, face burning. Too old? I balanced my checkbook to the cent just yesterday. My taxes were already filed for the quarter, and yet, in her eyes, I was no longer capable. I was a liability. I backed quietly into the dining room before they could see me, my roast cooling on the plates, my appetite gone. Age, I realized, wasn't just measured by birthdays. It was measured by how quickly the people you trusted began circling, waiting for you to stumble. That night, I sat at the desk Diane and I had shared for decades. Her neat handwriting still labeled every folder: insurance, mortgage, investments. One file in the back, untouched since she passed, read simply, "Future Planning." I opened it and found blank but notarized forms we had prepared years ago. Documents for a trust, a power of attorney, contingency papers. Diane had insisted on it back then. "Just in case," she'd said with that quiet foresight I never argued with. Holding those papers under the yellow desk lamp, I felt her presence in the room. She had left me tools, knowing a day might come when I would need them. A day when even my own blood might mistake my grief for incompetence. I leaned back in my chair, the house silent except for the clock ticking down the hall. Clara thought age meant weakness. She thought she could shame me into surrendering what I'd built. But I'd lived long enough to know that revenge doesn't always come in raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes in signatures, and I was ready to sign the papers she never saw coming. The morning after that uneasy Sunday, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that once comforted me when Diane was alive, but now pressed down like a heavy blanket. I made my coffee stronger than usual and sat staring at the ledger on my desk. Every number was exact, every column balanced, but Clara's words still rang in my ears. "He's too old to handle money." I had two choices. I could confront her and Eric outright, which would only give them more reason to paint me as defensive, maybe even confused. Or I could do what Diane always did when storms rolled in: prepare, quietly, thoroughly, with patience that made the storm irrelevant by the time it broke. By mid-morning, I had the answer. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Helen Marston, my lawyer of 30 years. Helen had drawn up our first mortgage papers, refinanced our comoe, and helped us set up Diane's will when her health began to falter. If anyone knew how to build a wall no storm could breach, it was her. "Harold," she said warmly when she answered, "I was just thinking of you the other day. What can I do for you?" "I need to come in," I said, my voice steady. "Today, if you can manage it." There was a pause, then her tone shifted. Less casual, more alert. "Of course. Noon?" I agreed. Helen's office sat above a row of shops on Main Street, with tall windows that let the winter light spill across her mahogany desk. She rose as I entered, her short gray hair catching the sun, her handshake as firm as it had been decades ago. "What's on your mind?" she asked once we were seated. I placed Diane's future planning folder on her desk and told her everything. The overheard whispers, Claire's creeping influence, Eric's silence. Helen didn't interrupt. She only tapped her pen softly against her notebook, eyes narrowing as the pieces fit together. When I finished, she opened the folder, leafing through the blank but notarized forms. A faint smile touched her lips. Diane was as sharp as they come. She knew this day might arrive. Her words steadied me. I'm not ready to give up control, Helen. Not now. Not while my mind is clear. Then you won't, she replied. Here's what we'll do. We'll establish a living trust immediately. Your assets, house, savings, investments, will be retitled into it. That makes them untouchable to anyone claiming you're unfit. You'll remain trustee, in charge of everything. And when the time comes, the successor you choose, someone you trust, will step in. Not Eric, not Clara, someone loyal to you. I leaned forward. I was thinking of my niece, Laura. She's a school teacher, steady as they come. Helen nodded. Perfect. We'll make her co-trustee now, with you. That way, if anyone questions your competency, she's already in place to keep the trust running. Courts respect continuity. A weight lifted from my chest. Clara thought she was circling a frail old man. In truth, she was circling a fortress Diane had already laid the foundation for, and Helen and I were about to finish building. Let's draft. The paperwork, Helen said briskly. The sooner we sign, the sooner this is ironclad. As her pen scratched across the documents, I felt a quiet strength seep back into me. I didn't need to raise my voice or beg Eric to see reason. All I needed to do was let Clara play her game, while I signed mine into checkmate. By the time I left her office, the winter air bit at my cheeks, but my stride was steady. In my pocket lay the drafts Helen would finalize within days, papers that Clara would never expect, papers that would outlive whispers, manipulation, and greed. For the first time in weeks, I felt like Diane was walking beside me again. For the next week, I said nothing to Eric or Clara. Silence, I knew, was my greatest weapon. If I had confronted them, Clara would have doubled down, painting me as defensive, maybe even paranoid. Instead, I let her think her whispers were sinking in. Each evening, I carried on with my routines: grocery trips on Tuesdays, hardware store visits on Fridays, church on Sundays. I kept receipts neatly folded in my ledger, the same way I always had. Clara's eyes followed me during these small errands. I caught her standing at the edge of the kitchen one evening, watching as I wrote down a check for the utility bill. Her expression a mixture of pity and calculation. You know, Harold, she said sweetly, you don't have to stress over these things. Eric and I could take care of it. It's easy for us. I capped my pen deliberately and closed the ledger. If I can build a business from scratch, Clara, I can still pay a light bill. Her smile thinned, but she said nothing. I noticed Eric shifting uncomfortably in his chair, eyes fixed on his coffee. My son wasn't blind, just afraid of conflict, and that fear made him useful to Clara. 3 days later, I sat again across from Helen Marston's desk. The final trust documents lay before me, every page precise, every clause airtight. My house, savings, and investments were retitled into the trust. I was primary trustee. My niece, Laura Bennett, was co-trustee. Helen slid the papers toward me, her pen poised. This is your safeguard, Harold. Once signed, no guardianship petition, no whispered accusation can touch your assets without Laura's approval. Clara and Eric will have no say unless you grant it. Do you want to proceed? I studied the documents, the lines crisp under the lamp. Diane's memory was with me, steady as ever. Yes, I said. The pen felt heavier than it should as I signed each page. With every signature, I felt the weight of Clara's plans lifting off my shoulders and falling back on hers. When the last page was complete, Helen gathered the papers neatly. Congratulations. You've just locked your doors tighter than Fort Knox, and no one outside this room knows they've been shut. That evening, Clara tried again. She stopped by unannounced, setting a grocery bag on my counter. Just thought I'd hope to be by it. Bring some things. You shouldn't have to keep running errands. It's too much at your age. I thanked her politely, put the groceries away, and walked her to the door. She lingered in the doorway, her tone softening into something meant to sound concerned. "You've always been careful, Harold, but people make mistakes when they're older. You could get scammed, or worse. If you'd just let us handle things." I cut her off gently, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "I appreciate your worry, Clara, but Diane and I made sure everything was handled long ago. You don't need to concern yourself." For the first time, her expression cracked. Just a flicker, annoyance hidden behind her smile. She wasn't used to me brushing her aside. After she left, I sat in my chair with the trust folder on the table beside me. Signed, sealed, filed. She thought she was circling a frail old man. In truth, she was circling a fortress she would never penetrate. And the sweetest part? She didn't even know it yet. Clara was never one to retreat quietly. When charm didn't work, she sharpened her concern into pressure. The following week, she showed up again, this time with Eric at her side. They arrived just as I was finishing supper, the knock on the door brisk and insistent. Clara walked in with that smile of hers, sweet enough for Eric, sharp enough for me. "Harold," she began, setting her purse on the counter as if she owned the place. "We've been talking. You've done so much for us over the years. Maybe it's time we returned the favor." Eric nodded, though his eyes didn't meet mine. "Dad, Clara thinks it might be best if we helped with your finances. Just routine things. Bills, bank statements, keeping everything in order." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "And you think I can't handle that myself?" Clara touched Eric's arm before he could speak. "It's not that you can't. It's that you shouldn't have to. You've earned your rest. Why burden yourself with details? We could make sure nothing slips through the cracks." Her words dripped with concern, but I heard the calculation underneath. Rest, burden, cracks. She was laying bricks for a wall meant to box me in. I smiled thinly. Diane used to say a man only rests when he can't stand anymore. Until then, he keeps moving, and I'm still standing. For the first time, Clara's smile faltered. Eric cleared his throat. "Dad, we just want what's best for you." "What's best," I replied evenly, "is letting me live the life I've built without interference. I didn't raise you to circle me like a bank teller counting out bills. I raised you to stand on your own." Eric dropped his gaze. Clara's lips tightened. She gathered her purse, and within moments, they were gone. The next morning, I visited Helen Marston again. "They're pressing harder," I told her. "What if they try something legal?" Helen adjusted her glasses, flipping open my trust folder. "Then we're ready. But let's strengthen your position further. Keep receipts, maintain your ledger, attend your regular appointments. If they ever attempt a guardianship petition, the court will want evidence of your clarity. We'll have a paper trail they can't poke holes in." She leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "And one more thing. Avoid arguments. Every raised voice, every stumble in memory, they'll twist it. Stay calm, Harold. Calm is stronger than shouting." I nodded. Calm had always been my weapon. That weekend, I put Helen's advice into practice. At the bank, I greeted Lydia Cooper, the manager, by name, depositing checks and asking for printed receipts. At the grocery, I exchanged a laugh with Raj Patel at the produce counter as I chose the freshest apples, carefully marking the date in my ledger afterward. At church, I shook hands with Pastor Green, discussing scripture with a clarity that made me feel steadier than ever. These small acts weren't just habits anymore. They were shields, proof. Every receipt and every signature said the same thing. Harold Whitman was not slipping. By the end of the week, Eric called. His voice was hesitant. "Dad, Clara thinks maybe we should schedule a family meeting. Talk about the future." I could hear Clara's influence in every word. Future, meeting, talk. She wanted to box me in with polite phrases until I handed her the keys. I let a slow smile spread across my face, though he couldn't see it. "Tell Clara," I said softly, "the future is already handled, and when the time is right, she'll see the papers herself." There was silence on the line, the kind that told me Clara was standing nearby, frowning. I hung up, set the phone down gently, and opened my trust folder once more. Signed, sealed, solid. My fortress stood. The storm might still come, but when it did, Clara would discover that every path she thought led inward only ended in locked doors. The next storm came faster than I expected. On a Thursday evening, I heard the knock on my door again. Clara stepped in before I could even invite her, Eric trailing behind with an expression that looked half guilty, half defeated. Clara wasted no time. "Harold," she began, her voice pitched with false sympathy, "we're worried. You've been making mistakes. The bills, the appointments, it's becoming too much." I folded my arms, steadying my voice. "Everything is paid, Clara. Every bill on time. You know that." She pressed on as if I hadn't spoken. "Eric and I have talked to a lawyer. If you won't let us help voluntarily, we may have to pursue guardianship. It's the responsible thing. You need someone looking out for you." Eric shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, it's not an attack. We just want to make sure you're safe." Safe. I nearly laughed at the word. In their mouths, safety didn't mean protection. It meant control. I kept my face calm, though inside a quiet fire began to burn. They thought they could threaten me into surrendering. They thought a man who had built a business from scratch, buried a wife with dignity, and survived decades of hardship would be cowed by paperwork and a lawyer's letter. I leaned back in my chair and smiled thinly. "You do what you think you need to, Clara, and I'll do the same." Her eyes narrowed. She had expected fear. Instead, she found steel. The very next morning, I returned to Helen Marston's office. She wasn't surprised. "Guardianship," she muttered, flipping her pen between her fingers. "Classic move when someone wants control. But Harold, we're ahead of them. The trust is signed and filed. Even if they petition, the court will see you've taken deliberate steps to manage your affairs." She reached into her cabinet and pulled out a fresh document. "Let's add one more layer, a durable power of attorney naming Laura Bennett. That way, if anyone questions your capacity, you can demonstrate that you've already arranged support of your choosing, not theirs." I signed without hesitation. Each stroke of the pen felt like hammering a nail into the coffin of Clara's scheme. Helen gathered the papers. "Harold, if they file, I'll stand with you in court. But I'll tell you this, judges don't look kindly on family members who confuse greed for concern. When Claire realizes what you've done, her face will be worth every ounce of patience you've had to muster." That weekend, I called Laura. She arrived in her modest sedan, her hair pulled back, eyes wide when I explained what I had signed. "Uncle Harold," she said softly, "I'll do this for you. I'll stand beside you as long as you need me." "Good," I replied, "because when the storm hits, I don't just need papers. I need people." Laura smiled. "Then you have both." On Sunday, Clara tried once more to needle me. At the church potluck, she leaned close, her tone as sweet as the pie she balanced on her plate. "It's not too late to let us help, Harold. These things are complicated at your age." I looked her straight in the eye and let the faintest smile tug at my lips. "Don't worry, Clara. The complicated part is already taken care of. I signed the papers. Everything is secure." Her fork paused midway to her mouth. "What papers?" "You'll see," I said, turning to greet Pastor Green before she could respond. The silence that followed was sweeter than any pie on the table. By the following week, Clara's patience had burned away. Her smiles were tighter, her voice sharper, her visits more frequent. I knew she wouldn't sit idle after hearing me mention papers. Curiosity and greed are terrible companions. They push a person to act faster than they should. I didn't have to wait long. On Wednesday morning, I received a call from Lydia Cooper, the manager at my local bank. "Mr. Whitman," she said cautiously, "your daughter-in-law was here today. She asked for access to your accounts, said she was helping you manage things. We told her politely that her name isn't on any of your accounts, and we couldn't discuss details with her. But I thought you should know." I sat straighter in my chair, a smile spreading across my face. "Thank you, Lydia. You did the right thing." "Of course," she said warmly. "We've seen this before. Families assuming rights they don't have. Rest assured, your accounts are secure. And if you'd like, I can put a note on file. No inquiries without you present. Yes, I replied. Do that. When I hung up, I chuckled softly. Clara thought she could charm or pressure her way into the bank. Instead, she had walked face first into a locked door. Later that afternoon, Eric called. His voice was strained, brittle at the edges. Dad, Clara said the bank embarrassed her today. Why didn't you tell us you'd locked everything down? Because it's none of your concern, I answered evenly. My finances are my responsibility. Always have been, always will be. He hesitated, then muttered, She just wants to help. No, Eric, I said firmly. She wants control, and there's a difference. The silence on the line told me he knew it too, though he wouldn't admit it aloud. That evening I opened my ledger, reviewing the receipts from the week. Groceries, gas, tithe for the church. I tucked them neatly into the folder Helen had labeled Proof of Capacity. It was more than paper. It was armor. I thought about Diane. She had always said, if you want to know someone's true heart, watch how they handle what isn't theirs. Clara's heart was showing itself more clearly each day. 2 days later, Clara arrived unannounced. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Harold, she said sharply, I tried to handle some things at the bank, and they shut me out. This is exactly what I was worried about. You don't realize how vulnerable you are. I set my coffee down slowly, met her gaze, and let my words land with deliberate calm. Clara, I'm not vulnerable. I'm prepared. And every door you try will stay locked because it was never yours to open. Her cheeks flushed red, her lips tightening into a line. For the first time, she didn't have a ready answer. She grabbed her purse, muttering something under her breath, and stormed out. When the door closed behind her, the house felt lighter, as if even the walls had been waiting to hear me say it. That night I sat on the porch with the trust folder beside me. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the dark sky. I thought of Diane again, of her foresight, her steady hand on my shoulder. Clara thought I was too old to handle money, but I had already handled her, without raising my voice, without giving away my hand. The papers were signed, the fortress complete. And the best part? She still didn't know just how thoroughly she had already lost. By early spring, Clara's patience finally snapped. She had failed to charm me, failed to guilt me, and failed to worm her way into the bank. That left only one path for a woman like her, force. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered by a man in a navy windbreaker who didn't bother to meet my eyes. He handed me the envelope, muttered my name, and left without a word. Inside was a petition, stamped and sealed by the Maple County Probate Court. Application for guardianship of Harold Whitman. My chest tightened, though not with fear, with anger. They had done it. Clara and Eric had asked a judge to declare me incapable of managing my own affairs, to strip me of my independence, and hand my life into their keeping. I called Helen Marston immediately. She answered on the first ring. Let me guess, she said, voice dry. The petition came. It did, I replied. What now? Now, she said calmly, we let them walk into the trap they've set for themselves. Bring the papers tomorrow. You've already done the work, Harold. The trust, the power of attorney, the receipts. We'll show the court you're not only competent, you're prepared. The following day, I sat in Helen's office, the petition spread across her desk. She read each line, shaking her head at the vague accusations, forgetting bills, misplacing papers, confusion about appointments. Helen circled them in red ink. These are soft claims, she said, easily dismantled. No dates, no proof. In your ledger, receipts, and bank statements show exactly the opposite. What about the judge? I asked. Helen smiled. Judges aren't blind to greed. Once we present your trust documents and the durable power of attorney with Laura Bennett, the case collapses. They'll look like opportunists, not caretakers. Her confidence was contagious. For the first time since Clara's whispers began, I felt not only steady but powerful. That weekend, I invited Laura over to go through the paperwork. She sat at my kitchen table, her pen tapping thoughtfully as she reviewed every page. "Uncle Harold," she said at last, "this is airtight. Even if they scream from the rooftops, they can't touch what you've secured." I nodded. They wanted to control me. Instead, they gave me the stage to show the court just how wrong they are. The hearing date was set for 3 weeks later. In that time, I lived exactly as I always had. I paid my bills, updated my ledger, visited Lydia at the bank, and made sure Pastor Green and Ellen at the hardware store saw me sharp and steady. Every interaction, every receipt, was another nail in the coffin of Clara's petition. Clara, however, couldn't resist reminding me. She showed up one evening, her smile smug, her words dripping with triumph. "We'll see what the court says, Harold. Sometimes people don't realize how much they need help until someone forces them to accept it." I looked her square in the eye and let my voice stay calm, almost gentle. "And sometimes, Clara, people don't realize how prepared a man can be until they see the papers he's already signed." Her smirk faltered, just for a second. Then she turned on her heel and left. As the door closed, I felt the quiet strength of every signature I'd made with Helen. The petition wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity, a chance for Clara's own greed to expose her in front of a judge. And when that day came, I would be ready. The courthouse in Maple County stood like a fortress of limestone, its steps worn by decades of disputes and resolutions. On the morning of my hearing, I climbed those steps slowly, not from weakness, but from deliberation. Every move I made would be watched, weighed, and judged. Inside, the air smelled faintly of varnish and old paper. Helen Marston walked beside me, calm as ever, carrying the thick folder of receipts, bank records, and trust documents. At her other side was Laura Bennett, my niece and co-trustee, her presence steady and reassuring. Clara and Eric were already seated at the petitioner's table. Clara wore a navy dress and that same tight smile she used when pretending kindness. Eric looked pale, shifting in his chair as though even he wasn't convinced of the words he was about to endorse. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Howard Stevens, a man with a graying mustache and sharp eyes, presided. He adjusted his glasses, looked at the papers before him, and began. "This is the matter of guardianship concerning Mr. Harold Whitman. Petitioners, you may present your case." Clara stood, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Your Honor, we only want what's best for my father-in-law. He has shown signs of confusion, forgetting bills, arriving at wrong times for appointments, and isolating himself since his wife's passing. We fear for his safety, and we believe guardianship is necessary to protect him from harm." She spoke smoothly, painting me as fragile, pitiful. Eric nodded occasionally, though he avoided my eyes. When she finished, Helen rose. "Your Honor," Helen said, her voice even, "my client is grieving, yes, but grief is not incapacity. We will show clear evidence that Mr. Whitman is competent, active, and deliberate in managing his affairs. Moreover, we will present documentation proving that his assets are already secured in a trust with a co-trustee of his choosing, rendering guardianship unnecessary." Helen began calling witnesses. Lydia Cooper, the bank manager, testified first. She described my regular visits, my precise handling of transactions, and how I requested detailed receipts every time. "In my professional opinion," she said firmly, "Mr. Whitman is as sharp as any customer I serve." Next was Pastor Green, who spoke of my engagement at church. "He quotes scripture with clarity," Green said with a smile. "We talk at length about sermons. His mind is steady, his faith strong." Then came Laura, calm and clear. She explained her role as co-trustee, how she reviewed every account with me, how the trust was structured to protect against exploitation. "My uncle chose this arrangement himself," she said. "It shows foresight, not confusion." Helen then laid the documents on the judge's bench. The trust, the durable power of attorney, the ledger filled with neat handwriting and dated receipts. Evidence of a man not lost, but deliberate. Finally, Helen turned to me. "Mr. Whitman, would you like to speak?" I stood, steadying myself on the rail. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low but clear, I may walk slower these days, but my mind is not weak. My late wife and I planned for this long ago. I pay my bills, I keep my records. What I cannot abide is the idea that grief is the same as incompetence. I am not incompetent. I am not careless, and I will not be stripped of the dignity I've earned. The room fell silent. The judge studied me for a long moment before nodding. Thank you, Mr. Whitman. Clara tried to recover, taking the stand herself. Helen's cross-examination was swift. Mrs. Whitman, she asked, holding up a printed email, is this your inquiry to a realtor about selling Mr. Whitman's house? It's dated just 2 weeks after Christmas. Clara's face drained of color. That was research. Helen's eyes narrowed. Research into expedited cash sales, without Mr. Whitman's knowledge, for a home you do not own. Tell me, Mrs. Whitman, was this about his safety or about his assets? Clara faltered, searching for words. The silence was louder than any answers she could have given. By the time the judge called a recess, Clara's mask was cracked, Eric's shoulders were slumped, and I felt a calm resolve settle over me. The court had seen the truth. As I stepped out into the hallway, Laura slipped her arm through mine. You did well, Uncle Harold, she whispered. I nodded, glancing toward the courtroom doors where Clara sat seething. The storm wasn't finished, but the tide had turned. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one under question. They were. When the recess ended, the courtroom felt heavier, as though even the air had taken sides. Judge Stevens returned to the bench, his gaze stern but curious. He gestured toward Clara. Mrs. Whitman, you may continue. Clara rose, her smile brittle, her voice pitched high with feigned concern. Your Honor, whatever documents they show, my father-in-law is still vulnerable. He forgets things. He isolates. Just last month Helen was on her feet before Clara could finish. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation without evidence. Sustained, the judge said, his eyes narrowing. Clara's cheeks flushed as she sat down, fingers twisting in her lap. Helen stood smoothly, her folder in hand. Your Honor, we ask permission to recall the petitioner to the stand. The judge nodded. Proceed. Clara took the witness chair, adjusting her dress, trying to recover her composure. Helen approached slowly, her voice calm but sharp. Mrs. Whitman, earlier you claimed you only wanted to protect Harold from mistakes. Yet in this email, she held up the document again, you asked a realtor about expedited sales. Did you inform Mr. Whitman? Clara swallowed hard. No, I didn't think he'd understand. Helen's eyebrow arched. Didn't think or didn't want him to know? Clara shifted, her eyes darting toward Eric. I was just being proactive. Helen stepped closer. Proactive about selling a home you had no right to sell. Proactive about dividing proceeds that weren't yours. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitman, that this guardianship petition isn't about Harold's safety at all? It's about money. The room went silent. Clara opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Helen turned to Eric. Mr. Whitman, did you know your wife contacted a realtor about your father's house? Eric stiffened, glancing at Clara, then back at the floor. I knew she was looking, but I didn't see the details. So you let her move forward with plans to sell your father's house without his knowledge? Eric's face reddened. I trusted her judgment. Even when it meant betraying your father's? Helen pressed. Eric's shoulders slumped. He didn't answer. Judge Stevens leaned forward, his voice sharp. Mrs. Whitman, Mr. Whitman, this court takes guardianship petitions very seriously. They are not tools for seizing control of property. If I find this was filed in bad faith, there will be consequences. Clara's mask slipped then. Her lips tightened, her eyes flashing with anger before she caught herself. The judge had seen it too. When Helen rested her case, she placed one final piece of evidence on the bench. My ledger. Page after page of neat handwriting, dates, receipts, every detail precise. This, she said, is the record of a competent man. Organized, deliberate, consistent. It is the opposite of incapacity. Judge Stevens flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. Not many younger men keep records this clear. By the time court adjourned for the day, Clara's confidence had cracked wide open. Eric avoided my eyes as they left the room. I watched them go, feeling no glee, only a quiet satisfaction. For months they had whispered behind my back, treating me as if age had robbed me of sense. But here, under oath, in front of the law, their greed was showing for everyone to see. Helen touched my shoulder. "Tomorrow the judge delivers his ruling. Rest easy, Harold. We've done what needed doing." I nodded, feeling Diane's presence again, steady as the rhythm of my own heart. Clara had played her hand, but it was my signatures, quiet, deliberate, that had sealed her fate long before she stepped into that courtroom. Tomorrow, the gavel would fall, and with it, the weight of every lie she had told. The next morning, the courthouse was quieter than before, as if the building itself knew the weight of the decision about to be made. I took my seat beside Helen Marston, with Laura just behind me. Across the aisle, Clara sat rigid, her lips pressed thin, while Eric's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Judge Stevens entered, his robe brushing the edge of the bench, his face unreadable. The gavel cracked once. This court has reviewed the testimony, evidence, and filings in the matter of guardianship concerning Mr. Harold Whitman. He paused, scanning the papers before him. The silence stretched, every tick of the courtroom clock loud enough to echo. "Guardianship is not granted lightly," the judge continued. "It requires clear evidence of incapacity. In this case, the petitioners have presented allegations, but no proof, no medical diagnosis, no documented failures. In contrast, the respondent has provided detailed ledgers, bank records, testimony from professionals and community members, and evidence of a valid trust and power of attorney already in place." He set his glasses down. "Therefore, this court finds Mr. Whitman fully competent to manage his own affairs. The petition is denied and dismissed with prejudice." I exhaled slowly, steadying my hands on the table. The judge's voice sharpened. "Furthermore, the court finds troubling evidence that the petitioners sought to use guardianship as a means to access property not belonging to them. This court will not tolerate misuse of the legal system. Costs are awarded to the respondent. Petitioners are ordered to return any keys, documents, or access they hold to Mr. Whitman within 72 hours. The gavel struck again, final as a closing door. Clara's face drained of color. Her mask of concern cracked into something raw and ugly before she caught herself. Eric sat motionless, his shame written plainly in the slump of his shoulders. Helen leaned toward me, her whisper calm. "It's over, Harold. You've won." As we filed out, Laura slipped her arm through mine. "Uncle Harold, I've never been prouder." I nodded, glancing back once at Clara. She stared at me, eyes burning, but powerless now. All her maneuvering, her whispers, her threats, undone by the very thing she underestimated most: a man's foresight and a woman's love that endured beyond death. That evening I returned home, setting the court order carefully into my folder. On top of it, I laid Diane's future planning file, the one she'd prepared years ago. "We did it, Diane," I whispered into the quiet. "Your wisdom carried me through." I brewed a cup of strong coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my ledger. With slow, steady strokes, I wrote the date, the case number, and one simple line: "Petition denied. Dignity intact." I leaned back, letting the calm wash over me. Clara had said I was too old to handle money, but the truth was clear now to everyone who mattered. I had handled more than money. I had handled betrayal. I had handled greed. And most of all, I had handled her.